retreat is the most sane experience.
那个闭关是差不多是最神圣的经验。
The world is crazy.
因为整个世界都是疯狂的。
And when you're in retreat, you suddenly wake up to that a little bit.
然后当你在闭关的时候，你突然间从那个疯狂的世界醒来了一下。
You feel a possibility of what our lives could be.
你感受到了那个可能性，就是我们的生命可能可以到的境界。
And then as you come back into the world,
当你回到了现实的世界
it's a little bit like coming into an opium den.
有一点像是回到那个人家吸鸦片的房间。
And you feel like everyone's asleep a little bit.
你就觉得每一个人都昏昏沉沉。
And it just hurts a lot.
那对我来说是很大的伤害。
Because it's all your loved ones.
因为这些人都是你爱的。
And you feel like nobody realizes they're asleep.
然后你发现没有人了解他们其实是在处于一个昏沉的状态。
And it's like an opium den because you want to wake them up, but there's nobody will respond, you know.
就像那个鸦片房里面，你想要把他们摇醒，可是大家都不理你。
And then what's hard is you feel yourself slipping.
然后最难的是发现你也开始有点昏昏沉沉。
It's like you're now, smoking the opium.
就好像你也开始跟着大家在抽鸦片一样。
And you feel something so beautiful slipping away.
你突然觉得有一些身上美好的事物开始离你而去了。
But the idea, I think, is that 3 years is a long enough time where hopefully it has gone in you deep enough.
那这个想法是说，这3年希望是够长的时间，能够让一些事情进到你内心够深的地方。
And it creates enough aching.
这样就替你制造了足够的那个动能。
Enough longing in your heart. Like you're longing for somebody or like missing. 向往
wish.
Yeah.
OK. 更多的向往。
It creates some kind of longing, 向往。In America, the president once a year gives what he calls the State of the Union address.
Huh?
He gives an address telling the country how everything is in the country.
哦，所以就是总统每年在美国都会有1年都会一次国情咨文。
And then he makes suggestions to the Congress.
然后他就会建议国会要做一些事情。
And everybody tunes in and watches it.
然后很多人大部分都会开电视，然后看那个。
And basically says, here's what the problems are, here's what's going well.
然后基本上总统就会讲说，这些是我们现在面对的问题，然后这些是我们做得好的部分。
So I thought it might be interesting for us just to spend the rest of our little time tonight doing that.
我觉得也不错，就是让我们今天晚上剩下时间，我们来做这样的事情。
Because for a little longer, I still have maybe a slightly different perspective.
也许呢，在目前在一段时间内，我可能还是会跟你们有不一样的观点。
So if it would be helpful at all for me to share that, I would like to.
所以如果是对大家有帮助的，我很乐意去跟大家分享我现在的这个视野。
So poor Lunshan, I'm throwing out a lot of new terms to her.
对不起，他就一直给我讲一些很新的名词。
So I said, Lunshan, I have a lot of numbers.
然后就跟我说，我有很多数字。
Like billions and trillions, and she's like, oh no.
几亿几兆的那种数字。
So, but we'll try this out.
然后，所以我就先翻译出来。
So here's a couple statistics for us to consider.
这边有几个数据的统计值得大家来想一想。
The world population has now reached 7 billion.
现在世界上大概已经差不多有72亿人。
30% of the population
30%的人呢
is wealthy enough to have a bank account.
够有钱，所以能够有银行户头。
Which means that 70% of the people that live on the planet do not have enough money to have a bank account.
意思是说，世界上有70%的人类的钱是不够有办法在银行开户头。
75% of the people in the world
75%的人呢
do not have their own bed.
他们连自己的床都没有。
Only 3 to 4% of people in the world have a computer.
只有3到5%的人类是有自己的电脑。
3 billion people don't have freedom of religion.
30亿人是没有宗教自由。
500 million people are in prison.
5亿人是在监牢。
Or in war situation.
或者是在那个战争的环境。
780 million people.
7亿8千万人。
Don't have clean drinking water.
没有干净的饮水。
That's 780 million people. That's like Taiwan times 34.
7亿8千万是台湾人口的34倍，
that can't even drink a cup of clean water.
连一杯干净的水都没得喝。
And then 3 billion people
然后又有30亿的人，
live off of $2 a day.
一天平均的花费的生活费不到2块美金，
So about 60 Taiwan
所以
dollars
大
a
概
day.
说60块台币。
So it's amazing to consider this, right?
所以是很神奇的去想到这种。
It's amazing to consider how fortunate we are.
你必须要想想说我们是有多幸运。
We were talking about this a little last night, I
昨
think.
天晚上我们稍微谈了一下。
And imagine somebody who you wish you could be like.
然后试着想想看说，哦，你的生命中想要过谁的那种生活？
Like imagine somebody whose wealth or superstardom you aspire to be like.
或者是你想象那种超级有钱人或者超级巨星，你想要过那样的生活？
Like I was thinking last night that I like to play music.
昨晚我就在想说，我喜欢玩乐器嘛，
And I watch these rock stars in
我
these
就看那
huge
些
arenas.
在那个大表演广场表演的那种那个摇滚巨星。
And you know they're playing in front of like 20,000
比
people.
方说他们在那个2万人面前表演，
And they strum their guitar, you
然后
know.
他们就在吉他轻轻的拨一下，
It's like, wow.
那个声音就这样传到整个会场这样。
You know, it's a sea of people.
你知道，就讲的是人海里面这样，
And the sound is so huge.
那个声音的力道多大。
And I think I will never ever experience that.
然后我就跟自己讲说，我一辈子不可能有这样的经验的。
You know, no matter how hard I try, I will never experience
不
that.
管我多努力的成为一个好的表演者，我也不可能到那种地步。
But wow, I would love to. You
但
know?
是如果有机会，我也很想要有那种经验。
What an amazing feeling that must be.
那将会是多么美妙的那种感觉啊！
So I think about people like that.
然后我就想想那样的那种明星，
And that feel like from me to them feels an impossible distance.
就像从我这个地方到他们那样的距离，
It's a-
根本就是不可能到达的。
It's a distance I could never travel.
那是一个我无法旅行的距离，
You see, it's a total
这
impossibility.
对我来说是完全不可能。
We could think about Bill Gates.
我们可以想象比尔盖茨嘛，
I will never be wealthy
我
like
永
that.
远不可能像他那么有钱吧。
In fact, I could think about a lot less people that I'll never be quite
事
wealthy
实
like.
上，我可以想到的是，比比尔盖茨穷很多的人，我也永远不可能到
You know,
达。
I'll never achieve that.
我永远不可能到达那样的境地，
It's just impossible.
对我来说就是不可能。
But then I was thinking about this,
然后我又想到这个，
and that's how our lives are to the majority of the people on the earth.
但是就是我们的生命相对于那些大部分的地球的其他人，
This seems impossible because we are all rock stars, you
这
know.
个听起来好像不可能，是因为我们就已经像摇滚巨星那样子的生
And
活。
and mostly all we see are other rock stars.
那我们只是看到其他的摇滚巨星嘛，
So we don't realize how actually rare we are.
所以我们不了解说我们是多么的少数，多么的非常的珍贵的那种机会。
The lives we live right now
我们现在所过的生活啊，
are completely unimaginable for most human
对
beings.
大部分的人类来说是完全无法期望的。
If you have even a little money in the bank
就
account
算你只有一点点的钱在你的银行户头，
and you own a scooter or a car,
你有一台车或一台摩托车，
you have your own bed, a computer,
你有自己的一台电脑跟一张床，
you could travel to another country if you wanted.
你想要去其他国家，你也可以去得到。
This is completely unimaginable for most human
这
beings.
对大部分的人类来说是完全无法想象的。
Most of the 7 billion people here dream about you.
大部分这72亿的人里面，大部分人都是想要梦想成为你这样子的人
It's
生。
so hard for us to see that.
这对我们来说非常难看到的这一点吧。
That's the opium den.
这就是所谓的那个鸦片的，
That's where we're all asleep a little bit.
就是为什么我们都是有点昏昏沉沉。
So then the question comes, the natural next question is this.
那下一个会自然出现的问题是什么？
What are we doing with our extraordinary good
那
fortune?
对于我们如此不可思议的幸运，我们用了什么事情来回
Our
做？
lives are unbelievable.
我们的生命已经完全不可思议了。
You know, I see like somebody like Bill Gates or a rock star, you know.
我像我看到比尔盖茨啊，或者是那个超级巨星那种人，
And I think they could have so much influence on the world.
我就在想说，哇，他们对世界有很大的影响力啊。
For example, to make it so every single person on the earth had enough water, clean water, and proper sanitation.
比方说， 让那个世界上所有的人都有干净的水喝跟好的那个下水道系统。
It would cost $9 billion.
会花90亿美金。
Europeans alone
光欧洲一个地方
spend $11 billion on ice cream.
光一年就吃掉了110亿的冰淇淋。
In order to have health care and proper medical care for every single person on the planet,
替世界上所有的人都有好的医疗保险跟照护的话
would be $13 billion.
需要花130亿。
Americans and Europeans
那美国人跟欧洲人呢
spend $12 billion on perfume.
花了120亿光在香水上面。
China has saying that they spend $148 billion on weapons.
那中国呢花了148亿在武器上
On military.
在军事武器。
Not far behind the United States.
跟美国差别没有多大。
Either of our governments could take care of all of the health care, of all of the nutritional needs, of all of the water for the entire planet.
任何一个国家的政府都有能力照顾全球人口所需要的饮水，或者是营养，或者是健康。
Now we all know that it's not so simple, right?
那我们都知道事情没有那么简单嘛。
The politics are incredibly complex.
那个政治非常的复杂。
You can't ask Europeans to give up ice cream
你也不能
necessarily.
要求欧洲人放弃吃冰淇淋。
But it's important to get it in perspective sometimes.
但是很重要的是，你得去看一下这个现状。
We are the wealthy people in this
我
world.
们是世界上最有钱的人。
You and I in this room, right?
我们在这个房间的每个人。
We are the rock stars of the earth.
我们是地球上的摇滚巨星。
And so what are we doing with our extraordinary good fortune?
那我们是如何来运用我们这完全超乎想象的幸运呢？
The average Taiwanese and American person spends about 19 hours a week watching television.
美国人呢跟台湾人呢，平均一个礼拜花了19个小时在看电视。
But by the time you're 18,
在你18岁的时候呢，
you've seen about 250,000 commercials.
你已经看了20到30万个广告了。
By the time you're 18,
当你18岁的时候，
you've seen 17,000 murders on television.
你已经看过17000次模拟的杀人画面。
You've seen 150,000 acts of violence on television.
你看了15万次暴力的演出。
91% of kids in modern world
摩登社会的现在社会的91%的青少年
say they have felt upset and disturbed by something they've seen on television.
都看过让他们觉得非常的沮丧跟很不舒服的那个电视画面。
In America, kids spend 900 hours a year in school.
青少年一年呢，在美国花了900个小时去上学，
They spend 1,200 hours a year watching
但
television.
花了1200个小时看电视，
And significantly more time watching television, playing video games, and going to school.
所以光看电视跟打电动的时间比去上学时间还多。
The average American and the average Taiwan person spends about 9 years of their life watching television.
意思是说，平均美国台湾的小朋友呢，花了他们9年的光阴在看电视。
So it's scary a little bit, right?
听起来很可怕，对不对？
It's a little bit irresponsible.
有点不太负责任的。
And I don't say this because I think we should all feel guilty.
我讲这个不是说我们大家都需要觉得有罪恶感，
That's just a kind of distraction.
但就是一种
分神。
一种就是对，算是一种分析。
But it's important for us to just for a moment every now and then wake up to what's happening.
但是对我们来说很重要，就是我们偶尔都要觉醒一下。
You know, and some of us probably don't even watch TV.
有部分的我们大概甚至电视都不看的。
And I'm just using that as an
我
example.
只是用那个当一个例子。
But we all know that we are not using our life to its fullest potential.
但是我们都知道，我们并没有把我们自己的人生花在完全的可能性上面，
Because we forget who we are.
因为我们忘记了我们是谁，
We forget the possibility of our
我
lives.
们忘记了我们生命的可能性。
I'm a young male.
我比他是一个年轻的男人，
I don't have any children that are dependent on
我
me.
也没有小孩需要养，
And I don't feel powerful, you know.
可是我却没有像他那样感觉到我自己有那样的力量。
You know, we're doing all of these yogic
你
practices
看我们做所有这些瑜伽的练习，
to develop what's called siddhis, yogic powers.
然后去想要发展出所谓的瑜伽的能力，像是一些神通。
And oftentimes people say, you know, I'm doing all these practices, why aren't I getting the yogic powers?
那很多时候很多人说，哎，我已经做了这么多修炼了，为什么没有得到任何神通？
And sometimes I look at people, right,
有时候我看看人啊，
in a yoga class,
在那瑜伽课，
and I think you have so much power.
然后我就说，其实你有很多神通能量，
How are you using the power you already have?
你要如何用你已经有的能量？
You know, we want more power, but we forget that how are we using the power we already have?
我们一直想要比自己现在还要多的能量，但是我们都忘了说，那我们要怎么用我们现在已经有的这些能量？
So I'm wondering, what's the problem?
所以我就在想说，问题在哪里？
Why don't I feel powerful
为什
sometimes?
么我有时候会不觉得自己有很强大的能
Why
量？
do I feel myself now slipping into the opium den?
为什么我现在会觉得我好像对吧，在那个鸦片房里面快要睡着了？
Like my heart is starting to close a little, you know?
我觉得我的心已经开始往内缩了一点点。
You know, now that I'm back on computers,
现在我已经开始要坐回电脑前，
I'm feeling busy.
我开始觉得忙碌，
I'm worried about healthcare.
我开始担心我的那个健康保险，
I'm worried about going to the dentist.
然后我担心我要去看牙医，
You know, it's all my own concerns.
都是关于我自己的一些问题，
And I just forget, right?
然后我就忘记了，对不对？
Like, where's that feeling of possibility?
那个那个感觉，那种可能性的那个感觉。
So, I don't know. I mean, I came up with a couple ideas,
然后呢，我有一些念头出现，
but this is just stuff off the top of my head.
这就是突然在我脑海中出现的。
I want to somehow pose the dilemma to you all.
我想要把这个难题丢给你们，
I want us to get a sense of the problem.
我希望你们能够感受到那个问题。
And the problem is we are the wealthiest people on the planet.
就是这个问题是我们其实是最富有的人在地球上。
Our lives are so, and I don't mean just money, right?
我指的不只是金钱的部分哦，
I mean opportunity.
还有机会。
Our lives are so extraordinary,
我们的生命是多么的神奇，
and we're stuck somehow.
但
Right?
是我们还是卡在这边。
And I think we all feel this at times.
我觉得我们都可以感受到的。
There's this feeling of being stuck.
有些时间，我们会觉得我们被阻挡在哪个部分这样。
I lived for a year in India,
我在印度住过1年，
and on the top of the house was a small room.
在那个房子的阁楼，在上一个小小的房，
It's where the grandfather used to live,
就是他们祖父以前住的地
who
方。
was a very well-known yogi.
他那个祖父呢，以前是很有名的瑜伽行者，
Many of the villagers used to come to get advice from him.
很多村里的人都会来听他给意见。
And at the moment of death,
那在他死的时候呢，
he was able to do something that's very common in the yogic tradition,
他可以做一些在那个瑜伽传承中还蛮常做的事情。
where he was able to consciously eject his consciousness out of the top of his head.
那他有意识能够在自己的控制之下，把他的意识是从头顶飞出去的。
So he got the family around,
所以他让家人在他身边，
and he said, I'm going to leave now.
然后他告诉大家说：“我现在要离开了，
My time is up here.
我在这边的时间已经结
He
束
was
了。
very old. ”
他很老了，
And then he went into meditation,
然後他就進入了冥想。
and very gently he just made his consciousness leave his body.
慢慢的，他让他的意识从身体离开。
You know, that's a deep yogic skill.
那是一个很深的瑜伽的能力。
The teachings on how to do that are all in Buddhism.
如何这个要怎么做操作的那个教法呢？都在佛教里面都有教。
In Buddhism, you rarely use that,
但是在佛教里，你很少用这个。
but it's useful in some situations.
但是在某些情况是还蛮有用。
But now the grandson lives in that.
但是现在他的那个孙子呢，现在住在他那个地方。
And I was talking to him one day.
然后我有一天就跟这个孙子聊
I
天，
said, Naeem, what do you do all day?
然后他就跟这个孙子说：“哎，你现在每天都在干嘛？
Like, you just sit up there all day. You don't work.
你就只有坐在那里，你也不去工作。”
You know, he comes from a wealthy
因
family.
为他从一个很有钱的家庭出
I
生。
said, all day, I just see you sitting up in your room.
我就说我整天就看你宅在家里。
And he said, I just mostly watch the Playboy channel.
然后这个男的就说，我就大概整天就会看那个花花公子的那个频道就好了。
But he said it with a feeling of sadness.
但是他讲的时候是心里有一种被忧伤的感觉。
He said, you know, my grandfather was a great yogi.
他说我的祖父是一个了不起的瑜伽行者。
And I'm like trapped.
但是我好像就被卡在这里了。
I can't stop watching the Playboy channel.
我没有办法停下来不看这个花花公子的频道。
He said, America has destroyed my life.
美国人已经摧毁我的人生了。
I said, Naim, I don't think you can blame America.
我就说拿一这个人那边，你应该不能再指责我们。
I said, I think you might have a little responsibility in
我
it.
想说你自己本身应该也要负点责任吧。
But it was this feeling as I looked at him, right?
然后这个感觉就是我看着他，
There was this feeling of being trapped.
就有一种他好像已经被绑在一个地方了。
He was stuck in a kind of soulless existence.
他好像就被卡在一个没有灵魂的状态里。
And I recognized that same quality in myself.
突然间，我发现我内心也有跟他类似的那种感觉。
And I especially feel that quality right now.
尤其是现在这个时候啊，
I felt so connected to the earth. Right?
我发现我好像跟那个世界地球有那么强烈的连结。
I built a big sundial.
我做了一个大的日晷，我自己做的。
And I designed it so it was 100% accurate.
所以我设计它，让它完全的精准。
So over the years, I could very much feel where the sun was.
所以一整年来说，我都可以感受到这个太阳是从哪个角度。
I always knew the exact phase of the sun, the moon.
我永远都知道那个月亮应该是从哪一面出来。
I knew exactly when the moon came up.
我知道月亮应该什么时候起来的时
I
间。
knew the shape of the moon before I saw it.
我在看到月亮之前就知道这个月亮今天是什么形状。
I knew how the stars moved.
我知道星星是怎么移动的。
I was eating almost just plants, you know.
我大概就只有吃一些植物嘛。
I felt all of the, I felt so connected.
我觉得我跟这个世界、这个地球这么的有紧密的连接。
And the feeling was extraordinary.
那感觉非常非常的殊胜。
I was spending my time in meditation, you know.
我在我的时间我都花在冥想上。
I was praying for the world.
然后我替这个世界祷告。
My heart was opened. I felt tragedies.
然后我的心是打开的，我完全可以感受到其他人的灾难。
I felt immense moments of suffering.
我可以感受到非常庞大的那种痛苦的时刻。
I felt more pain than I've ever felt in my life.
我感受到的那个痛苦，是我整一辈子都没有感受到那么深的痛苦。
But the pain had substance.
但是这个痛苦是有它的物质化的，
It made me feel more alive.
让我觉得我自己变得更有活着的感觉。
You know, there's a kind of pain that makes us numb.
有一种你知道，有些痛苦会让我们失去知觉。
And that's the pain of seeing violence on television.
这就是那种我们在电视上看到暴力的那一种痛苦。
That's the pain even of the tragedy that happened the other night here.
这就是那种痛苦，就是前几天我们在节目上看到那样子。
The world is getting more disconnected, you know?
世界是变得渐渐的更疏离的。
And it's making young men, especially in America, crazy.
那让那些年轻人，特别是美国年轻人都疯疯的。
There was more killings in America in those 3-year retreat than there had been in like 10 years before that.
在我闭关这3年呢，在美国发生的这些滥杀的事件呢，比之前的整个10年加起来还多。
You know, and I'm not trying to get against modern technology right now.
我现在并不是在想说要反对那个现代的科技产品。
I'm very glad I live in a culture that has Novocaine. It's what so you don't feel pain.
所以我很感谢我是住的这个环境是有一些止痛剂的。
I'm very glad I have modern medicine, right?
我很麻醉剂，我很高兴我们现在有那个现代的医药可以医疗。
It's extraordinary to have internet.
这是非常棒，我们现在有网际网络。
But there's also a disconnect that I think many of us feel.
但是又有一种疏离感，是我相信很多人都有感受到的。
And so I'm trying to figure out why does this disconnect? Why?
然后我就在想说，为什么会有这种疏离感出现？
And I think one thing that occurred to me
我在想有一件发生在我身上，是我突然想到的，
is we don't pause regularly
因为我们都没有常常固定的暂停的习惯，
and consider the fact that we're going to die soon.
然后没有暂停起来想说有一个事实，就是我们都即将会死亡，很快会死亡。
There's a Hindu scripture
有一个印度的经典
called the Mahabharata.
叫做Mahabharata，
And in it, a person asks a saint,
就是这个故事是经书的内容是有一个人问一个圣者，
said, "What's the most amazing thing in the world?
请问是什么是世界上最神奇的事情？
In the whole universe, what's the most
在整个
incredible
宇
thing?"
宙里面，什么是最了不起的？
And the saint says,
圣者就说，
"The most incredible thing in the whole universe
这个全宇宙中最了不起的事情，
is that human beings don't realize they're going to die."
就是人类不了解他们即将会死亡。
You know, we know intellectually we're going to
我
die,
们有知识上的理解，我们会死，
but we don't know it on some visceral level, on some feeling level.
但是在那个内心深处那种感受的领域呢，我们没有那种感觉。
So, you know, in Buddhism, we meditate a lot about our death.
所以在佛教呢，我们有很冥想很多关于我们的死亡，
And it sounds depressing.
听起来好像很令人沮丧，
You know, it sounds like Buddhists should just be depressed all the time.
听起来好像说佛教徒就应该一天到晚就很沮丧就好了。
First of all, the Buddha taught all life is suffering.
首先，佛陀教大家生命都是有苦的，
That's a horrible marketing strategy
这
for
是非常糟的那个行销的手法，
a horrible marketing strategy for a religion.
尤其是替一个宗教来行销的话，这是太糟糕的行销手法。
The second thing is, okay, meditate on the fact that you're going to die.
然后第二个是说，你得专注冥想在这个就你会死的这个事实。
When I first heard that, I was very young.
我第一次听到的时候，那时候还很年轻，
I thought, I need to go find a Buddhist and show him a good time.
然后我就觉得说，我应该去找个佛教徒，然后让他们知道说什么是快乐的人生。
You know, but what happens when you start to do that?
但是你知道吗？当你会发生什么事呢？如果你开始去做这两件事，
What happens when you start to get in touch with those realities?
如果你开始去跟这两个事实做出连结的时候，
Buddhists in general are not depressed people.
你知道吗？佛教徒通常都不会是那种忧郁的人。
Now, I first should distinguish something.
首先，你必须要分辨一下一个事情。
And I know you've been sitting for a long time. We've just got a few more minutes
我
together.
知道你们已经做很久，但是我们只是要再花一点时间在一起，
So hang in there.
所以撑着一下。
So there's two kinds of Buddhists,
所以有两种佛教徒，
and there's two kinds of Christians,
那也有两种基督教
and
徒
two，kinds of Muslims and Hindus.
两种印度教徒跟两种穆斯林。
There's those people who actually practice and those people who don't.
一种就是有修行的，一种就是没修行的，
And that's an important distinction.
那是很重要的一个界限要画。
So now when I say Buddhists,
所以当我说佛教徒，
I mean simply people who practice
我指的是那些有修行的，
every day,
每天修行的人，
not just on holidays,
不是只有在放假的时候才修
and
行，
not just when they hear they are terminal.
或者是只有在他们听到他们快挂了才要修行的人。
Most Buddhists are not depressed people.
大部分佛教徒都不是那种忧郁的人，
You know, the people that are meditating about the reality of their death,
那种去冥想他死亡这件事实的人呢，
how life is unsatisfactory,
知道说为什么生命是永远会不满足，
they tend to be the most joyful people in the world.
他们倾向是世界上最快乐的一种。
In America, everyone's looking and saying, why are the Buddhists so happy?
在美国，他们都会看说，为什么这些佛教徒这么开心呢？
So it's a funny thing, right?
所以这是一个很有趣的事情，对不对？
There's some secret there
有一些秘密在后面，
that's worth looking into.
值得去推测。
And I don't know, many of you were probably raised Buddhist.
我不知道很多你们当中的在座的各位，可能是是佛教徒的家庭成长。
You know, and we tend to habituate the religion we are raised with.
我们通常就是习惯于我们生养我们家庭的原来的宗教，
We get into the ritual and we forget the living reality.
然后我们就去做了很多的那个仪式，但是我们却忘了说它的那个现实是怎么回事。
It's the same thing in America with
就
Christianity.
像是美国人跟基督教之间的关系也是一样，
It's all the rituals and, you know, la la
都是那
la.
些仪式唱诵啊。
And then you have all kinds of sexual scandals in the church.
然后你就看到很多那个教堂的那些性丑闻，
Everyone's bored,
然后每个人都很无聊，
and there's not a lot of living tradition.
就没有那些已经还存活的那个传承。
And I've only been in Taiwan for a few days,
我只有在台湾几天而已，
so I can't make any statements about your culture.
我也没办法替你的文化做任何注解。
But perhaps there's similar things here.
不
You
过
know?
我猜，也许在这边有类似的情况。
So I wanted, just in a little bit of time we have left,
所以在我们剩下一点点时间呢，
I want to look at Nagarjuna.
我想要看一下那个龙树菩萨，
He wrote a text called Letter to a Friend,
他写了一个有名的叫做亲友书。
and he wrote it to a king,
他其实亲友书是写给国王，
and it was advice to a king
是一个对国王的建议，
on how to be a real Buddhist,
如何成为一个真正的佛教徒，
how to reinvigorate yourself, how to become more fully alive
如何让你的生命更有意义，
with the truths of Buddhism.
以那个佛教给你讲的真实的现象来做。
The text is incredibly beautiful.
这个经书的内容非常非常的美妙。
I read it and it opens my heart
读了它之后，就可以把心打开了，
because it's really written for us.
因为它真的是为了我们写。
Because the king is a busy person.
因为国王是一个很忙的人，
He's got responsibilities.
他有很多的责任，
He can't go off on a 3-year retreat.
他没有办法去过3年闭关。
What kind of lunatic could go off on a 3-year retreat?
什么样的疯子才会跑去做3年闭关？
We have responsibilities.
我们是有责任感的人，
So
我们有责任要做。
it's a beautiful text.
所以这是很美好的经书。
And he says there's 5 things
他说有5件事情，
that if you focus on,
如果你能专注在这5件事上，
they will help you to wake up a little bit.
它会帮助你觉醒一点。
So let's just finish with looking at those 5
然后我们
things.
就来看这5项。
He says, the first thing he says is simplify.
他第一件他讲的是说把事情简单化，
That you have to simplify your life.
你必须要把你的人生简化。
The opposite of this
那相反的是什么？
is a scattered and distracted mind.
就是一个很涣散、很被干扰的一个意识。
The first enemy to becoming a real Buddhist.
成为一个真正佛教徒的第一个敌人是什么？
The biggest entrance into the opium den
就是一个通往那个鸦片坊的康庄大道者，
is to distract yourself.
就是干扰自己。
So the way we protect ourselves
所以我们保护自己的方式，
is not through willpower.
不是透过意志力。
Naeem watching the Playboy channel.
你知道那个人看那个叫拿伊那个印度人看那个花花公子频道，
He failed, and I suggest we all would fail in his position.
他就失败了。那我建议是说，如果我们在他的那个环境，我们也会失败。
Whether it's sex or whether it's too much taro cakes,
不管是太多的性或太多的芋头酥，
if we're relying on willpower, we're going to fail.
如果我们要靠自己的意志去战胜它，我们一定会失败的。
There's a science to this that we don't have time to get into.
我曾经有科学的实验证明，但是我们现在没有空去讲。
But to really quickly touch on it,
但是很快的解释一下，
the more you resist,
你要是越是去抵抗，
the greater the pleasure
那这个兴奋的感觉会更大。
when you finally give in to what you're resisting.
尤其是当你终于得到你本来不愿想要抵抗的东西的时候，你的那个感受愉快会更高。
If there's chocolate cake in the fridge,
如果冰箱里有巧克力蛋糕，
and I think I shouldn't eat that
然后我跟自己讲说我不应该要吃它，
because it's not good for
因
me,
为对我来说不好。
the more I try to resist that,
你越是想要抵抗它，
the greater my anticipation.
那我对那巧克力蛋糕的那个期望就会更高。
This is just basic 101 psychology,
这就是心理学101最基础的。
which means what I'm actually doing is I'm increasing the pleasure I'm about to get from the cake.
因为我做的这件事情，其实就是在增强那个我如果真正得到巧克力蛋糕的时候会感受到的喜悦。
I know this is a subtle point,
我知道这是一个很细微的，
but play with the idea for a
但
bit.
是想一下这个。
So if I rely on willpower to avoid the Playboy channel or the chocolate cake,
所以如果我想要靠着我的意志力来抵抗这个花花公子频道或者是巧克力蛋糕，
I'm setting myself up to fail.
那我就是让自己准备走向失败了。
And I'll get stuck in a downward spiral of guilt and depression.
然后我就会一直在一个恶性循环中，一直觉得那个罪恶感跟那个沮丧、忧郁的那个环节。
So you are a rock star.
所以记得你们是摇滚巨星嘛，
Stop that now.
所以现在就立刻停止这件事情，
Stop the downward
不
spiral.
要做这个恶性循环，
You will not win it.
因为你不会赢的，
It will destroy you.
它会直接把你打败。
How do you stop it?
那你应该要如何来
For Naeem, it would be to throw the TV off the roof.
对于那个印度人来说，他应该做的事情，把电视整台从外面窗户丢下去。
Start working with how you have designed your life.
开始来设计你的生活应该要怎么的过。
And so the first thing we do is simplify our lives.
所以我们第一件要做的事情就是简化我们的生活。
Throw out half of everything that's in your house.
你家里所有的东西呢，都丢掉一半，
You don't need it,
你不需要它们，
and it's depressing you in a way you have no idea right now.
而且他们伤害你，让你感到沮丧的程度呢，是你现在完全无法感受到的。
I'm speaking from direct experience.
我讲的是我个人直接的经验。
I'm like a friend of yours that's come back in time.
我就像你的朋友，是从未来回到现在来跟你讲。
It's like, imagine it's like 1982.
想象现在是1982年，
I'm telling you to take all of your extra money
我告诉你去把你所有多的钱，
and invest it in Apple computers.
然后去买苹果公司的股票，
And you say, what's a computer?
然后你问我说什么是电脑，
I'm saying, trust me.
然后我跟你讲说相信我，
Just trust me
就
on
相
this.
信我这个，
You think, who is this guy?
然后你就会想说这样想，
Don't listen to
不
him.
要听他的，
You have to trust me on this.
但是你必须要相信我。
I threw out everything I owned when I entered retreat.
当我进入3年闭关的时候，我把所有的东西都丢了。
Well, to be honest, almost everything I
啊
owned.，
诚实来讲说，几乎每一样都丢了。
I threw out a lot.
我丢了很多，
I had a big fire,
我有一个大火，
and we threw it all in the fire.
把所有东西都丢进去烧了。
My friend filmed it.
我朋友把它拍下来，
And it was very hard to do. Yeah?
很难做到这个。
And I felt incredibly free.
我后来觉得就非常的自由，
It was like I had weighed myself down for all these years.
就好像这些年我一直把这些重量压在自己身上。
Everything in your house that doesn't actually have a function,
在你家的任何东西现在完全没有功能的，
in English we call them this word. In
在
English,
英文我们叫它
we call them a knick-knack.
叫做 knick-knack。
A knick-knack is something that doesn't actually do anything.
这个 knick-knack 就是那种完全没有作用的东西，
It's like a kind of decoration,
就像一个装饰品。
but then, and you appreciate it for how long? Maybe 2 weeks?
也许有2个礼拜内你还蛮喜欢这个装饰品的，
Maybe 2 months?
也许2个月，
You look at it
你看看它，
and you say, oh, that was from my trip to the Grand Canyon.
哦，就是说，哦，那是我上次去大峡谷的时候买的纪念品。
After 2 months pass,
2个月后，
you've used up all of any good energy in it.
你已经把他身上所有的正面能量都消耗完了，
And it's a kind of sickness that you keep it there.
然后就变成一种病态，你把它留在那。
We all do it.
我们都做这种事情。
What went into that fire was 90% knickknacks.
那个丢进那些大火的东西呢，95%都是这种 knick-knack 的
Go
东西。
home and look at each thing and say, does this actually do anything?
你回去把你所有的财产东西都拿出来看看，这个东西是有任何作用的吗？
Have I used it in the last 12 months?
过去12个月来，我有用过它们吗？
If the answer is no, throw it out.
如果答案是没有的话，那就去把它丢掉。
You know, you keep the pants and you think, well, I'm going to lose weight eventually.
你会把那个以前瘦的裤子留着，说有一天我会再瘦下来，
And then I'll be able to fit into them
然后我
again.
就可以穿进去。
Buy new pants when you lose the weight.
我跟你讲啊，等到你真正瘦下来，再去买一双新的啦。
Or for you, it'll be when you finally gain the weight, right?
或
Because
者对，因为你们都太瘦了，就是说有一天当你们真的变胖再去买。
we're all overweight in
你知
America.
道，在美国我们都太胖了，
You guys aren't, but some of you still think you are, which is a little crazy.
你们大家一点都不胖，但是有些人你们还觉得自己太胖，真是疯了。
So the first thing Nagarjuna says is simplify your life.
所以第一件事情啊，那个龙树菩萨讲的就是把生活搞得
But
简
he
单，
says it in the negative.
但是他用的是那个比较负面的词句，
He says, stop your scattering mind.
就是说停止你涣散的意识。
So when you look at the text, that's what you're going to see.
所以你看到亲友书的文字的话，其实他讲的是停止你涣散的意识。
But if you notice, what I'm doing is I'm switching it around so we could look at the positive aspect
但
of
是
it.
你可以知道，我做的事情是我用正面的语言来形容它。
So the second thing he says,
第二件事，龙树菩萨说的是
forgive people.
原谅别人，
Let go of a little bit of your anger every day.
每天把那个生气少生一点。
The worst kind of anger
比较糟糕、最糟糕的一种气氛是，
is the anger that you're justified to have.
那是那种你觉得你是站在正义的一方，你有权利去生气的那种气。
When somebody really has done you wrong.
当有的人真的做了对不起你的事，
And we feel I'm justified.
然后你就觉得我有这个权利生气啊。
If I went to court, the court would vote on my behalf.
因为如果我进去法院的话，法院也会站在我这边支持我的。
That's the worst kind of anger.
这是最糟糕的一种生
It's
气，
so hard to let go of it.
因为这种生气是非常难让他放下。
Yes, they really did cheat on you.
的确，他们真的有背叛你，
They really did lie to you.
他们真的对你说谎，
They really did steal from you.
他们真的偷窃你，
They were totally wrong.
他们完全是错的。
But the anger is only hurting you.
但是这样的生气伤害的只有你自己。
And I know forgiveness can be so hard sometimes.
我知道呢，原谅有时候是非常困难，
It's so difficult.
它非常非常困难。
I read a story of a woman in the Nazi Germany camps.
我看过一个故事，是讲说在那个集中营呢，在那种纳粹集中营有一个女人。
And she in the camps she had an experience of Christianity.
在那个集中营里面呢，她有了那个基督教的一些体验。
She saw Jesus, you know.
她看见了基督。
And the night she saw Jesus,
那看见基督的那一晚呢，
her young sister was taken away from her.
她的年轻的妹妹被她从她身边被带走，
And shot in the head.
然后直接从头射杀死。
She survived.
她这个女人后来活下
Not the
来
sister.
但是她
her
她的妹妹没有活下
the
来，
one sister died.
其中一个妹妹死掉了。
The other one who had a conversion experience, Christian conversion
但
experience.
是另外这个活下来的姐妹有一个变成基督徒的体验。
After she got years and years later,
很多年之后呢，
she was traveling around the world talking about Christianity.
她在那个世界上巡回演讲关于基督教的经验。
She was talking about forgiveness.
她讲到关于那个原谅这件事情。
After one talk, a man came up to her.
在一个公开演讲之后，有个男的走向她，
He said, I was a prison guard.
然后他告诉这个姐姐说，我曾经是这个监狱的守
in the Nazi prisons.
在那个就是集中营里面的那个警卫，
Could you forgive me?
请你原谅我吗？
She suddenly realized it was the man that killed her
他
sister.
突然间了解，这就是杀了他妹妹的这个男人，
How bizarre, right?
多奇怪，对不对？
He didn't know who she was, obviously.
他并不知道这个女人是谁，
And she froze.
然后这个演讲者就冻结了。
She said, there's no way I could forgive
他
him.
突然讲说，我没有办法原谅
She
他。
felt like a total fake, right?
他突然觉得自己之前讲的那些布道都是假的。
Here she was talking about forgiveness.
他在跟大家讲说原谅，
And she hated this
但
man.
是他是真的恨这个男人，
So she prayed, you know.
所以他就祈祷，
She said, please give me the strength to forgive him.
请给我力量来原谅。
And in that moment, she turned to him and she said, I forgive you.
在那之后，他就转向这个男的说：“好，我
And
原
then
谅
and then a second later,
你。”1秒钟之后，
she felt it in her body.
他就感受到在他身体里面，
But it was almost like a leap of faith
这好像就是一种信仰，
because she didn't quite feel it at first.
因为他一开始并没有感受到想原谅的那个
She
心，
wanted to.
他是想要
And，she was willing to let go of the anger.
然后在那时候他愿意把那个生气一部分放下，
But she was scared she wouldn't have the strength.
但是他害怕他不会有这样的能量来做这件事情。
And then the strength came to her.
然后因为他祈祷，所以他这个能量进入他。
When I read that story, I was thinking about all the people that have hurt me.
我听到这个故事之后，我就开始想这些曾经伤害过我的人，
And nothing's like that, you know?
一点都没有像那么严重的
I
状况。
thought if she could do it, I can do it.
然后我就想说，如果他做得到，那我应该也做得到。
And we can't all do it at once, right?
我们不可能一口气一下子就做到。
But the teaching is we can do a little bit every day.
但是这个教法是说，叫我们一天做一点点。
Somebody cuts us off in traffic.
有个人从我们开车的时候给我们超车进来，
Now we think, here's a chance to practice.
我们就是要想说，现在就是一个练习的好机会，
I can start small.
我可以从这小事情开始。
So every day we let go a little bit of anger.
所以每一天我们就让一点点的生气放下。
All right, we have 3 more in 1 minute.
然后我们只有1分钟，但是我们要3个要讲。
The third one,
第3个，
he says, get in touch with your emotions.
他说跟自己的情绪做一些连接。
Now, if you know Nagarjuna, you're going to think, wait a second.
如果你认识龙树的话，龙树菩萨的话，你会说
That
对，
is totally not true.
这一定不是真的。
Nagarjuna does not talk about emotions.
那个龙树菩萨绝对不会讲那种情绪的这种东西。
If we're in a debate ground,
如果我们在那个经辩的会场，
you say, Will, you are full of it.
然后他就会说，为了你根本就是一个笨的人。
I don't even think there's a word for emotions in Tibetan language.
因为我根本不认为在西藏这个语言里面有那个情绪这两个字。
And I would say, okay.
我会说好吧。
What Nagarjuna really says
龙树菩萨真正讲的是
is avoid dullness,
避免有那个浑浊昏沉的状态，
avoid drowsiness.
不要让自己这样昏昏沉沉。
But I'm going to propose something radical.
但是我要跟你们讲一些很特殊的事
I'm
情。
going to say that's the exact same thing as getting in touch with your emotions.
我会讲说，这跟真正跟自己内心的情绪做连接的是完全一样的事情。
Because watch next time,
就下一次你就观察自己，
that you have something painful come up that you don't want to look at.
有一些痛苦的事情从你心中升起，但是你不想面对它。
We move into a kind of dull state of mind.
我们就把自己进入到一个很昏沉的意识状态。
I remember I was feeling perfectly fine one day.
我记得有一天，我觉得自己是非常好的状况。
I was alert. I was well rested.
我睡得很好，休息得足够，然后我也很警醒。
And then my girlfriend came home,
然后我女朋友就回来了，
and she was really mad about something.
然后她对某件事情很生气，
And we had to process.
我们就有那个过程。
And we were sitting on the steps of the porch.
我们就坐在那个阳台的那个阶梯上。
Within 5 minutes, I could barely keep my eyes open.
大概有5分钟的时间，我没有办法把眼睛张开。
That's not a good thing when you're in a fight with your partner.
你要知道，跟你的伴侣吵架的时候，这不是一件好事。
But I thought this is so weird. I'm suddenly exhausted.
我就觉得说这好奇怪，我突然间就觉得累坏了。
And I think many of us, our exhaustion and our dullness and our drowsiness relates to not feeling the emotions.
我觉得我们很多人的那种昏沉那种很累的感觉，是因为我们没有去面对我们的心里真实的情绪。
When strong emotions come up, we block it.
当很强烈的情绪升起的时候，我们立刻去阻断它，
And we fall back into a kind of drowsiness.
然后我们就往后退到一个混沌的那种状态。
For many of you that have a regular meditation practice,
对于很多你们在座有在固定做冥想练习的朋
you
友，
can see this mechanism at work.
你可以看到这个机制是怎么运作的。
Things come up in meditation
有一些念头就出现在那个冥想中，
that you'd rather not look at,
你宁愿不要去看
and the
到它，
mind will just go dull.
然后你的意识就会进入一个昏沉的
But
状态。
we don't often connect that.
但是我们通常不把这两件事情做连
We,
接，
we don't make the connection.
我们没有做出连接，
So I'm inviting you to try an experiment
所以我邀请你们去尝试去感受这个经验，
and practice every day feeling,
每天都要练习去感觉，
which can be as simple as asking yourself, how do I feel right now?
很简单，就像是问自己说，我现在感觉如何啊？
I wish we had more time because there's so much to say about this.
我希望我们有更多时间，有好多需要谈的啊。
But let me, if you'll allow me to go 10 minutes over,
如果你们可以让我再讲10分钟，
let me say this.
让我讲这个。
Your emotions come in within 3 levels.
你的情绪是有3种层次的，
It starts with a physical sensation.
一开始是生理的感觉，
It moves into an emotion
之后进入的情绪，
that gets followed by a story.
然后之后才是一个故事出现。
We oftentimes confuse those
我
things.
们通常把这3者搞混。
Like if you ask somebody, what are you feeling right now?
有时候你问人家说你现在感觉如何啊？
They'll say, that person shouldn't have done that to me.
然后他就会说那个人不应该这样对我。
Which one is that?
这个是什么？
That's a story,
这是
right?
故事。
What about if I say, what are you feeling right now? And they say, I'm feeling really mad.
然后如果我问他说你现在感觉如何啊？然后人家回答我说我觉得很生气，
That's not a feeling, that's an emotion.
那就不是感觉，那个是情绪。
If I say to you, what are you feeling right now?
如果我问你说你现在感觉如何？
And you say, I'm feeling a sensation of tightness in my chest.
你说我觉得这个胸口紧紧的，
And I'm noticing my breath is getting shorter.
然后我发现我呼吸急促，
That's a feeling.
这才是感觉。
So I'm talking about getting in touch with your feelings.
所以我讲的是你们要去感觉，
Before you label it in an emotion,
在你放了那个什么是这种情绪的标签之前，你要
And
先
then
去改。
and then before you label a story onto it.
在你把一个故事讲出来之前，
The
你要
story
先把
the story is almost always not what the emotion is about.
那个故事呢，几乎都不会是你的那个情绪，
And the story is almost never what the feeling is about.
而且故事通常也都不会是那个感觉它本身。
You could have heard something on the radio.
你也许可以听到在收音机里面讲的一些事情，
Like for example, what happened on the subway the other
比
day.
方说之前捷运那前几天的事情，
That's an extraordinarily painful thing,
那
right?
是非常痛苦的事嘛，对不对？
It affects our lives because we're riding that subway. You know?
那影响到我们的生活，因为我们就是在做捷运的人。
This is your home. It's like an invasion into your home.
这是你的家庭，就好像人家入侵你的家一
The
样。
moment you heard that story, something happened in your body.
当你听到那个故事的当下呢，你的身体发生了一些变化，
You're most likely totally unaware what happened in your body.
你大概几乎不会去注意到你身体发生了什么样
The
子，
next thing that happened was an emotion came up.
之后才是那个情绪进来，
And then followed by that was a story.
之后才会是故事。
The emotion could have been grief.
那个情绪可能是哀伤，
The story could have been anger.
那故事本身可能是一个关于生气的故事。
There's much to say about this, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of start to think about distinguishing those.
这个内容其实很大，那我现在只有时间可以让你们稍微去建议你们去感受一下这边的差异，
And play with this idea of getting in touch with the feelings.
试着这个想一下这个感觉，就是说如何去跟自己的那个感受去感受自己的感受。
What's happening in my body?
我的身体出现了什么状况？
Just get curious, especially when something intense happens.
有一些好奇心在这上面，尤其是一些强烈的事情发生的时候，
And you may find that the intensity lessens,
你会发现那个强度会变得比较少一点。
that you don't move into dullness so quickly.
那你不会立刻就进入到那个昏沉的状态去。
So Nagarjuna says dullness.
所以龙树菩萨说那个浑浊，这个昏沉。
I'm suggesting to experiment with the opposite of that being feeling.
但是我建议你的是去看跟它完全相反的那个感觉。
Again, we're talking about how not to get caught in the opium den.
当然，我们现在讲的还是如何不让自己被抓进去那个鸦片房里面，
Simplify your life.
把你的人生变得简化一点。
If you're addicted to the Playboy channel,
如果你无法克制自己去看那个花花公子频道，
don't rely on willpower.
就不要靠着你的意志力去控制它，
Create something in your life to help but protect you.
帮你自己设计出一个适合的环境来帮助你抵抗那样的事情。
Second one is learn to forgive
第二件事情就是学会原谅，
by practicing in small ways every day.
每天用一些小小的练习来开始。
The third one is to get in touch with your feelings.
第三个是跟自己的感受做连接，
Watch them turn into emotions. Watch that turn into
观
stories.
察他们由感觉变成情绪，再由情绪变成一个故事的过程。
The fourth one is learn to be a custodian.
第四个呢，就是学习成为一个保管人，
Learn to be a custodian of all of your possessions.
当自己财产的保管人，学着去做这件事。
What I mean by that is we think that we own our bank account.
我指的是说，我们都认为我们自己拥有这个银行户头，
We think we own our car,
我们以为我们拥有我们的车、
our family,
我们的家庭、
our shoes.
我们的鞋子，
But a little reflection will show us that that's completely not true.
但是其实一点点小小的那些视线就会告诉我们说，这不是真的。
Any one of us could die tonight.
我们当中任何人今天晚上都可能挂掉，
Who owns that money in your bank account
那
then?
谁会拥有你那个银行账户里的钱呢？
Right? You know,
对不对？
who owns your shoes?
谁会拥有你的鞋子呢？
Tomorrow after you've died.
你明天死掉之后，谁是你鞋子的主人呢？
You don't own anything.
你并没有拥有任何东
It's
西，
simply on loan to you.
都只是借给你用的。
And the more you have, the more responsibility you have to use it properly.
你有越多的话，那你就有越多的责任去好好的用这些东西。
So look around at your empire,
看着一下你的王国，
because we all have empires.
因为我们都有自己的王国。
You know, based on how the rest of the world lives, we are kings and queens.
根据 其他世界上其他人的生活的状态，我们基本上都是国王跟皇后的那种。
So you wake up and you survey your vast empire.
所以你早上起来之后呢，你就教阅你整个王国。
And you ask yourself, how can I use this today?
然后就问我自己说，那个我如何能好好的使用这些东西
In a way that would benefit
用一个可以有对那个有帮助的方式。
who?
帮助谁？
Yeah, he said, Gibson said others.
因为就你说其他人，
But Buddhism says two people.
佛教是说有两种，
Over and over and over and over and over in Scripture, it says the same thing.
在那个所有的经书一遍又一遍的讲的是同一件事。
Use your great wealth,
用你很大的那个
great money,
用财富，使用你的财富
to benefit yourself
去帮助你自己，
and others.
还有他人。
Because it doesn't help anybody if you give everything away and then you're just poor.
因为这并不会对人家有帮助，就是你把你所有东西都给别人，然后你自己变成一个穷光蛋。
And you're calling your friend and saying, hey, can I come sleep on your
然
couch?
后你就打电话给你朋友说，我可以去睡在你的沙发吗？
You want to be comfortable.
你需要是一个舒适的环
You
境，
want to be healthy and strong.
你
Right?
也需要是一个健康的、强壮的。
But don't get caught by the delusion that you own any of it.
但是不要被这个幻象所抓住，认为说你拥有这些所有事情。
Everything, including your husband and wife, is on loan to you for a very short amount of time.
所有的事情，包括你的丈夫或你的太太，都只是借给你用短短的一段时间。
The due date is quickly approaching.
那个需要退还的日期呢，还东西的日期呢，很快就会到的。
You know, like you rent a video
比方说，你去租那个录影带
and you have 24 hours to watch it.
你只有24小时来看它。
That's how our lives are.
这就是我们的生命的状况。
The due date is quickly approaching.
那个要还回去的日子很快就会出
You
现。
know, nobody would download a video from iTunes
不会有人上那个 iTunes 去下载那个影
for
片。
like a 24-hour rental period
这只有是24小时的借期。
and think like, I own that.
然后就想说，我拥有这个影片，
That's mine.
这是我的。
And you know, you put the picture up and you just look at it. You
然
know?
后你就把那个影片的照片放在那边，然后看着它。
And that's how our children are, you
这
know?
就是我们的小朋友。
That's how our car is.
这是我们的车。
So Nagarjuna says, don't get attachment to the objects of pleasure.
所以龙树菩萨说，不要有对这些暂时的愉悦的令你愉悦的东西感到执着。
Nagarjuna says the way to stay out of the opium den is to not get attached to the things that you think you own.
所以龙树菩萨说，那个从那个鸦片屋走出来的方式，就是不要去依赖那些你认为你拥有的东西。
To realize that you're just a custodian,
去
right?
了解说你只是一个暂时保管的人。
All right, let's see what the last one is.
那我们来看最后一个是什么？
So the last one is doubt.
最后一个是怀疑。
And you know, the Buddha said, don't believe anything I say.
佛教讲的是说，不要相信我说的任何事。
The Buddha was enlightened.
佛陀是已经开悟的，
I am not enlightened.
但是我并没有开悟。
The Buddha was extremely smart.
佛陀非常非常聪
You
明，
know, I am not extremely
那
smart.
我也没有非常聪明。
The Buddha had really long earlobes.
那佛陀有很长的耳
You
垂，
know, I don't.
我也没有。
So, of course, this would also apply to anything I've said tonight.
所以这一条也会适用于在我今天晚上讲的任何事情。
So he said, don't believe anything I've said.
他说不要相信我讲，
Try it out.
你必须要亲自去尝试
If。it works,
如果有效的话，
you have a responsibility to act on it.
你就有责任去照着这个行动。
If it doesn't work,
如果没有效的，
then let it go.
那就放下。
Life is too short. Find something that works.
生命太短暂了，赶快去找另外一个比较有用的。
But now here's a delicate point,
但是这边有一个很细微
and we'll
的，
end on this point.
那我们在这个点上解释。
It's extremely easy to criticize things.
要批评事情非常容易，
It's extremely easy to criticize government.
要批评政府非常容易，
It's extremely easy to criticize your friends,
要批评你的朋友非常非常容易，
to criticize, your family.
批评你的家庭非常容易。
It's not hard to figure out what people are doing wrong.
要发现别人做错什么一点都不难。
Right? It's very easy. It doesn't take great intellect.
你根本不需要很有智商都可以做。
You can look at somebody and within 10 minutes you can figure out a few things that they're doing wrong with their
你
life.
看任何人大概10分钟就可以发现说他生命中做错了什么。
It doesn't mean you're smart.
这不代表你聪明。
When you watch news programs,
当
right?
你看这些电视新闻台，
Or like talk shows,
像那种脱口秀节目，
they're all just sitting around criticizing
他们
things.
就坐在那边不停的批评别人，
And we watch and we think, wow, they're so smart.
然后我们看着他们说，哇，这些人还真聪明啊。
They're so good at figuring out why everyone's doing things
然
wrong.
后你看他们这些人好厉害，都可以发现别人都做错了什么事。
It's a sign of stupidity.
其实这是一种笨蛋的表现。
Because we're in the opium den, we don't see it, right?
但是因为我们大家都在鸦片房里，所以我们不觉得这是很笨的行为。
Trust me, all of us are screwing up.
相信我，我们每一个人都是有问题的，
We're all losers in one way or
我
another.
们都是某种程度的鲁蛇，
Nobody's living really very well.
没有人是真正过得很好的。
Why waste your energy on it?
为什么要浪费你的能量呢？
You know, why spend your energy? It's inexhaustible, the things we could critique.
就是
It's never ending, it's infinite.
永远要批评的话，永远批评不完的啦。
You know, it's not like you're going to run out, you're not going to get to the end of things to critique.
你绝对不会到了一个境界，是说我已经再也找不到东西可以批评，
So you could just waste your whole life that way.
所以
You know?
你可以浪费你整个生命都在批评。
But it's a master, it's a spiritual master who can look at somebody and figure out what they're doing right.
但是你必须要是修行上的大师，你才有办法看见一个人，然后发现他做对了什么事。
It's a sign of a great person.
这是一个一个征兆，就是说你是一个好的、了不起的人物的一个能力，
And the sign of an extraordinary master
一个极为高明的大师，
is somebody who can look at somebody they live with
是一个他可以看到他周遭一起生活的人，
and see all the things they do right.
而且可以看到他们做对的地
You know,
方。
because those are the hardest people.
因为这些跟我们一起生活的人呢，是最难
To look at our wife or our husband and think,
去
man,
看看我们的老公跟老婆，
you do that right,
然后说哇，你那件事情做的真棒，
you do that right, and you do that right.
你又做了这件更棒的事情，又做了那件很棒的事情。
Now, you know, of course we know that there's plenty of things they do wrong, right?
你也知道嘛，我一定知道他们做了很多错的事，
So doubt is important,
所以怀疑很重要，
but it's not like this lazy doubt.
但是不是那种很懒惰的那种怀疑，
It's not like sitting back and like, I doubt that.
不是说就坐在那边说啊，我怀疑那件事情，
It's to be critical,
是说要很有批判性，
but open-mindedly.
但是要把心胸打开。
So the opposite of this
所以相反的是说什么？
seems to me to have something to do with curiosity,
对我来说是有一点是做一些有好奇心的事，
is to not be lazy with your doubt.
不要对你的那个怀疑有任何的允许他去懒惰。
In your spiritual life, for example,
在你的修行的道路上呢，
don't just figure out what you're doing wrong.
不要只是去找说你做错的，
Be curious about what's possible.
去好奇说有什么是可能的，
Be curious about the possibilities in your life.
去好奇你生命的可能性，
Be curious if Buddhism is real.
去好奇说是不是佛教讲的内容都是对真的。
You know, the Buddha said we can get to a point in our consciousness, right,
佛陀说我们可以在我们的意识呢到达一个境界，
where our entire body changes
那个境界会让我们整个身体都产生了转化，
before the moment of death,
在你死亡之前，
and we don't have to die.
然后我们就不用死了。
That's weird.
那听起来很奇怪吧？
I mean, that's bizarre, right?
那很怪吧，对不对？
You should have a lot of doubts about
你
that.
应该对他这个内容有很大的怀疑，不是吗？
But it's an interesting thing to consider.
但是这是一个有趣的事情来想，
And it's not like we have these bodies and we walk around forever and we're like vampires.
而且并不是说我们就像那个
像吸血鬼，
吸血鬼一样，我们有这个身体可以永远一直活下去嘛？
This body has to fall away.
这个身体有一天一定会挂掉的，
Your body will be eaten by worms.
你的身体有一天会被虫吃掉。
But the Buddha is saying that your consciousness could get to a point where it doesn't have to die anymore.
但是佛陀说，你的意识可以，当你到一个境界，你就不用死掉了，
The body could fade away,
身体可以就消失，
but your mental stream is already in a paradise.
但是你的意识 可以进入到一个净土去了。
And then what do you do in that paradise?
那你在那净土那个天堂里面，你做些什么事？
The Buddha says you emanate infinitely
佛陀说你有能力去化身，做无数的化身，
and serve sentient beings.
然后能够帮助其他众生。
And it's pre-thought, it's before thought.
这是在你想之前，
So it's not like you think, oh, I can go help that person.
这不是说你想的说哦，我可以去帮助这个人。
It's so far from anything we can conceptualize
那个程度境界之高，已经不是我们现在这种意识状态可以去想的。
that anything we could say about it is almost just silly, right?
我们可以用我们语言形容出来的东西，听起来都非常的傻傻怪怪的。
But that instantaneously
但是在那个在同时的状态下，
we would emanate anywhere we're needed on any planet in the
你
universe.
可以在同一个时刻化身在任何地方跟时间点。
And that just sounds bizarre to us.
这听起来非常的不可思议，很奇怪，对我们来说。
Unless you're one of those beings, right?
除非你是其中一个这样子的，
Unless you're a Buddha emanating in
除
there,
非你是佛的化身，
which is even likely
但它其实是有可能的啊，
that you're like sitting there being attentive,
因为你可能坐在那边，然后只是为了帮助
helping me to try to get it.
帮助我能够来了解，
And you get suspicious of the people around you.
所以你对于你周遭的人都会有稍微的怀疑，
So this is an idea that you can have a lot of doubt about.
所以这是一个你可以有很多怀疑的一个观念。
But if you
观点
infuse it with also curiosity,
但是你如果伴随着你对这件事情强烈的好奇心的话，
with an open mind,
那你又以一个很开放的心胸来看待它，
it can be a very powerful way to live.
可以是一个非常有能量的方式来过你的人生。
You know the story of the frog in the well, right?
你也知道那个井底之蛙的故事了，
He thinks that the well is the whole world.
他以为那个井就是整个世界了。
And an eagle says, man, you don't know anything.
你知道那个老鹰就跟他讲说，你根本不了解什么事。
There's a thing called the
你
ocean.
知道世界上有一个东西叫做海洋吗
And？he's like, it can't be bigger than the well.
然后他就说不可能比这个井更大
So
了
the。eagle says, right, just hop on my back.
然后那个鸟就跟他讲说，你就爬到我背上来。
And he flies him to the
然后
ocean.
他就把他载到了那个井底之蛙，载
And,
到了
and the
大海
frog
去。
sees the ocean
然后井底之蛙看到了大海，
and his head explodes.
然后他的大脑就爆炸了。
We are the same.
我们就是那种情况。
And we're so convinced that the well is all there is.
我们就是非常的相信那个井就是世界上最大的那个。
And that's the opium den that we're all in.
这就是我们所处的这个鸦片屋。
We have this idea that we pretty much have a pretty good grasp on what's actually happening.
因为我们似乎都相信说，我们应该还蛮清楚知道世界是怎么一回事。
So Nagarjuna says, start now.
所以龙树大师就说，从现在开始，
Work with these 5 things, right?
对这5件事情来做修行，
Simplify your life.
简单化你的人生，
Start practicing forgiveness.
练习原谅，
Combat dullness
然后跟那个昏沉
by
浑浊的
starting
抵
to
抗
feel your life.
开始去感受你的生命，
Consider yourself a custodian of all the things that you have.
然后开始把自己当做所有财产的保管人，
And then be critical but be curious.
然后要有批判力，但是也要有好奇心，
Be smart but be open-minded.
必须要很聪明谨慎，但是又要有开放的心胸。
Realize all of us are completely wrong about everything.
了解说，我们所有的人都是完全错的，对任何事情的了解都
And
是错。
slowly let go of your hold on what you think you know is reality.
渐渐的让放下你相信的那个现实是怎么一回事。
So let's end there. I'm sorry to go late.
对不起，让大家比较晚的。
Soon you're gonna find me just in the opium den.
很快你会发现，我也跟大家一样进入了鸦片的世界。
And then you gotta remind me,
要记
okay?
得要提醒我，好吗？
So I felt like I needed to get the transmission out.
所以我觉得我必须要赶快把我的那个感受告诉你们。
So when I'm stuck, you can shake me.
所以当我又昏沉过去，你可以把我摇醒，
And then I'll get out and you'll get in.
然后我就会出来，然后你又会进去，
And then I'll come
然后我
shake
再
you.
来摇你。
So hopefully we can keep it going.
我希望我们能够持续这样。
It's deeply from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank everybody for helping with the 3-year retreat.
打从我心里深处，我非常感谢大家帮助我们的3 年闭
It
关，
was extremely beautiful.
这是非常非常美好殊胜。
And I would like to dedicate my life towards helping people as much as I can.
我想要能够 把我的生命用在帮助越多人越多越帮助越多越好这样。
Which means that everybody that I'm ever able to touch in my life, if I ever am able to.
就是说，如果我这一生中可以有接触到的人，
That's also your karma.
这也是你们的因果。
Those are your seeds now.
这也是你的种子。
And it also keeps us all connected for future lives.
这会让我们大家都彼此继续做连结，甚至到未来世。
So thank you. Have a beautiful night.
所以谢谢大家，希望有个美好的夜晚。